This week's parsha is Parshat Bo. It continues the story of the Exodus, but we're going to discuss the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because Rosh Chodesh has just passed, so it seems appropriate. But moreover, it's because Rosh Chodesh actually features in this week's parsha. That is to say, this is the parsha where the Jews are commanded about Rosh Chodesh. Now we have two questions about this. The first is, why here and why now? After all, like we said, we're right in the middle of the Exodus story. It's very exciting. Last week's parsha, God thrashed the Egyptians with 7 plagues. Now, this week's parsha picks up right where it left off. We get into the 8th plague and then the 9th plague. And then we have this confrontation between Moshe and Paro. And then God promises Moshe, or tells Moshe about the 10th plague and how the Jews are going to leave free. And they're going to leave with all the wealth of Egypt as compensation for their years as slaves. And right in the middle of this, when things are getting super exciting, we just get this, oh, and by the way, Rosh Chodeshim, right? This is the first month. You should sanctify the new moon. And then it goes on with this other litany of mitzvahs. The question is, what is this doing here? This is getting in the way of this amazing story. Tell us after or tell us before, but not right. We're in the middle of the crux of the story. So why? What's going on? And in order to understand, and by the way, why is Rosh Chodesh the first mitzvah mentioned? Why is it the first mitzvah that the Jewish people are commanded to observe? And in order to answer these questions properly, we really need to take a step back and see with a broader lens what was going on in Egypt. Let us just say the Jewish people were slaves. They were slaves in Egypt. Their fathers were slaves. They fully expect their children to be slaves. And moreover, that's assuming, of course, that their children even survive, given that Paro has issued an edict to kill all of the newborn male babies. So things look quite grim. And you can imagine that just because the nation is set free doesn't mean that they'll be released from the slavery that they've just experienced. We could fully expect them to have post-traumatic stress disorder on a national scale. And given that, God commands them to sanctify the moon. Why? And that's that because the moon is in contrast to the sun. Now in Egypt is a desert, and so we could fully imagine that the sun seemed all-powerful and unremitting. It rose and set every single day, and while it was up in the sky, its power was clear. It was obvious. It was there every single day. And as such, the Egyptians actually worshipped the sun as a god. They had a sun god named Ra. Their own sovereign named himself after the sun god. His name was Ra-Meses. And as such, God needs to contrast the Jewish people with this culture and set them apart. And in order to really realize that, in order to inculcate that into the Jewish people, he says, sanctify the moon. Because unlike the sun, which is unchanging and unremitting, and that led the Egyptians certainly to believe that just as the Jews are slaves now, so too will the Jews be slaves forever. The Jews are told, no, sanctify the moon. Because the moon, what it is today is not what it was yesterday, and it's not what it's going to be tomorrow. The moon waxes and it wanes, and that is an extremely powerful, inspiring message to tell a nation that's now going to become free and doesn't know what to do with itself almost, because everything has changed now. But the answer that God gives them is, no, change is what I expect of you. I want you to change. And that, in turn, is a message to the entire Jewish people that we don't want a people to stay rigid and fixed. The idea is that if you have a bad midah, right, if you get angry easily, if you're an impatient individual, if you're a stingy individual, or if you're a spendthrift, you don't know how to control money, so such, look at yourself and change that value. And we're given that first and primary ability to do so by God commanding us at first. The first mitzvah he gives the Jewish people is that you can change. Because just as you're sanctifying the moon, which changes every single day, so too can you change every day, and so too are you expected to change every day. And that's set specifically in contrast to Egyptian culture. And that is something that distinguished the Jewish people for now and for always, because later on in the story of Hanukkah, what were one of the 3 edicts that the Greeks made against the Jewish people? So one was, of course, not to observe Shabbat. The second was no Brit Milah, which of course set the specialness of Judaism. but the third was Rosh Chodesh. Now, who cares about banning Rosh Chodesh? I mean, of all the things to ban, Shabbat comes every week. It's like a centerpiece in Judaism. Brit Milah, we get it. Even the most secular Jews observe Brit Milah. For Rosh Chodesh, I mean, who cares? The answer is that Rosh Chodesh is really what set the Jewish people apart, because we, as a people, actually declared our own calendar. We were in charge of time. We sanctified time. When a Jewish person saw the new moon, they were allowed to violate Shabbat, to go to Jerusalem, to tell the Sanhedrin, I saw the new moon, and to set, of course, you need to have 2 witnesses, but the 2 witnesses could effectively set in place all the mitzvahs and all the chagim that came later on. And it was that distinctive ability for Jews to change time and to change nature to respond to them. That is to say, spring, right? Pesach is the festival of spring, right? It's the Chag HaAviv. Now, who declares when Pesach is? The Jewish people, by telling you when to sanctify the moon and when Nisan starts. And so this ability to effectively to change themselves and to change time and to change nature is what was imbued into the Jewish people when they were released from Egypt, and which set them apart as a Jewish nation. Shabbat Shalom.